Hey everyone, welcome back to the Study Tube project. My name is Viola and I'm a fourth year studying classics at the University of Oxford. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Roman mosaics. So what actually is a mosaic? Mosaics did not actually originate in Rome. They were a Greek Hellenistic art form that the Romans then adopted and adapted. These then came on to be really popular floor decorations across the whole of the Roman Empire. So not just in Italy, but we also find mosaics in the northern provinces, the eastern provinces, and in North Africa. How were these mosaics made? Mosaics were made by setting thousands and thousands of small pieces of stone, terracotta, glass, and other materials into mortar or plaster. And mosaics also had several layers, which gives us an impression of how expensive they would have been to commission. There were lots of different styles and techniques used to create mosaics. The most favourite technique was the Tesseract Mosaic, which consisted of small blocks of stone that could be tightly packed together and arranged. The most common type of mosaic that had tiny small bits of tesserae was called opus vermiculatum. This was the very finest type of mosaic in antiquity because it used incredibly small pieces of stone that required a lot of skill and precision. Opus vermiculatum could also be found in small isolated emblemata, which were small either circles or squares, and small mosaics that could be slotted into a wider, bigger mosaic that had less intricate designs. Another typical type of mosaic is the opus sectile style. This was incredibly expensive as it used very high-class materials such as glass and marble instead of just pebbles or stones. These required enormous technical skill. These are typically found in domestic architecture or public buildings. But there were other styles of mosaic too, such as the pebble mosaic and the irregular stone chip mosaic. But now on to the different styles of mosaics that could be found in Italy, the eastern provinces, the northern provinces, and especially Britain, and also North Africa, because I think that this is really interesting how this art form was so popular that it developed and spread across the entire Roman Empire, and to see how each province and each area of the empire actually took this art form in, but then developed it into their own style using their own resources. Let's start with Italy, where the traditional mortar pavements became popular. The 1st century BC and AD, Italian mosaics were predominantly black and white mosaics, and they had very simple designs, just floral decorations or some other kind of geometric pattern. These are typically grids of octagons, hexagons, small and large squares with oblong figures. The geometric pattern style mosaics can be seen, for example, in Hadrian's Villa in the 2nd century AD, and also in some of the houses in Ostia. This style then developed, and in the early 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, we see the black and white figure mosaics transition, and instead now there's a preference for having a continuous white background to the mosaic with the black stones creating figures, and so the entire floor mosaic creates this illusionistic field. An example of these types of mosaics can be seen with the mosaics in the Baths of Neptune at Ostia. You can very clearly see that the figures have been depicted using the black mosaic, whereas there's a white continuous background, and this allowed them to very clearly depict the images that they wanted to on the mosaics, and it also meant that the figures very much stood out to the viewer. In the 3rd century AD, the black silhouette figures becomes even more popular. We can see this with the mosaics found at the Baths of Caracalla, where there are lots of large figures with geometric decoration. But the one difference in this is colour has finally started gradually coming into Italian mosaics. And this is quite a late development, as we'll see afterwards when I discuss the coloured mosaics in the East and North African provinces. But we start to finally see some colour in Italy, and then we get to the 4th century AD in Italy. We start seeing some absolutely incredible, humongous mosaics, especially ones in Sicily, such as in the Villa del Casale and the Villa at Piazza Armerina, both in Sicily. These start depicting huge hunting scenes, and other types of themes start to become prevalent in Italian mosaics. I think it's really interesting that these hugely detailed and beautiful and incredibly well preserved mosaics that have been found are very similar to North African mosaics, and scholars all think that these mosaics that have been found in Sicily were actually created by the North African mosaicists because it's such similar in design and style to the ones found in North Africa. That's a kind of brief overview of the development of mosaics in Italy, and I'm now going to move on to talk about the North African mosaics. So mosaics actually arrived quite late to North Africa, and they were predominantly found in Africa Proconsularis, which is now in modern Tunisia and Tripoli, Tania. The mosaics that initially arrived to North Africa had very strong Italian influence, unsurprisingly, but what was interesting is that the North African I can't even say this word, mosaicists, very quickly rejected the black and white geometric floral style from Italy, and they favoured coloured mosaics. The reason for this is likely possibly due to geological resources in northern and eastern Tunisia, as there was a high availability of coloured stones from Kemto. A major influence of the North African mosaics were the patrons who actually commissioned the mosaics. They could determine the innovations in commissioning the works for their private houses. And unlike in Italy, most North African mosaics were found in private houses rather than in public buildings. This is probably due to the fact that the primary purpose of mosaics in North Africa was for decoration. Unlike in Italy, where mosaics could be used as shop signs or business advertisements, as we can see in Pompeii and in Ostia. So the first type of style of North African mosaic, when they first arrived in around the 2nd century AD, were geometric patterns, but these weren't necessarily always in black and white. They also included some kind of colour. We can see this, for example, at the Bards at Aquila, as well as in the Scorpianus mosaic at Carthage. Mythological scenes and depictions of the 4 seasons were also incredibly popular in North African mosaics. However, by the mid to late 2nd century AD, North African patrons started demanding different types of themes to be depicted on their mosaics. And so we start to see completely different themes on North African mosaics. These included hunting scenes, amphitheatre and theatre scenes, as well as circus themes. The choice to depict such scenes only reflects what was going on in the Roman Empire at the time, and there had become, in the late 2nd to 3rd century, a huge popularity and love of the games, beast fights and hunting and gladiatorial games. And when we see these being depicted on mosaics, it only reflects the attitudes of the North African patrons. One of the most famous mosaics that depicts an amphitheatre scene is the Mosaic of Macarius from Sperm, dated to around the mid-3rd century, and it's found in Sousse in modern Tunisia. This mosaic I think it's incredible, and it's so interesting because we start to see words being depicted on mosaics as well, not just labels, which was very common in the eastern provinces mosaics, but we also see the patron himself, Macarius, wanted to honour himself. He wanted to create this mosaic to show off to the visitors or whoever would see this mosaic. And you can very clearly see on this mosaic that there are 3 elements that are combined: the representation of an exciting scene, the commemorative and the honorific record, as well as the assertion of supernatural protection. The commemorative and honorific record predominates, and it constitutes the main reason for the mosaic being commissioned. Macarius presumably held office in one of the neighbouring cities which possess an amphitheatre, since there cannot have been a city of any size at Smermat. And this mosaic lists Macarius' benefactions, particularly his paying for entertainment in the amphitheatre, and he is presented as running this show out of his own pocket. As I said, there's a huge amount of labelling of figures. The beast fighters are pictured on little stilts, and there are lots of exotic animals like leopards. The labelled Magiri is in the vocative in Latin, which has the crowd asking Macarius to step in and to reward the performers. So we have depicted a soldier stepping in with a tray of money, bags of 1,000 denarii each, which is represented by the infinity symbol, and it was a lot of money. And then towards the end of the inscription, it says, "Hoc est habere, hoc est posse." This is having, this is being able. So this is kind of interpreted as meaning this is what it's like to have money and to have power, and it displays the benefactor's generosity. It's an example of the value of provincials, and it's just overall, I think, an extraordinary example of the utility of mosaics and to see how they're being used differently in a different province. Another example of a really famous mosaic is the mosaic at the Villa Ritz Leeson in Tripoli, Tania in Libya. These mosaics here include fine pictorial panels of Hellenistic type. There are rural scenes depicting peasants at work in their farm threshing corn, but then there are also gladiatorial scenes and beast hunting and other fights depicted on these mosaics. One example of a hunting scene can be seen with the Carthage bull hunt, which is generally accepted as one of the earliest of the 3rd century AD hunting scenes. This depicts on each of its 3 registers an episode from a single hunt. So I'm going to move on to the northern provinces, but especially Great Britain, as there are lots of mosaics that have survived, albeit only in large country villas, so that also might be biased towards those who could afford commissioning mosaics. But again, just like North Africa, there was no tradition of mosaics before Britain became part of the Roman Empire. The mosaics found in Britain are mainly coloured and typically have lots of figures, floral motifs, depict the 4 seasons, just like in North Africa, but they also have an overwhelming amount of mythological subjects and scenes. The villa at Bingall in Sussex has a Medusa mosaic, and also mosaics depicting the circus and amphitheatre. And there's a mosaic of Venus at the villa at Rudston in Yorkshire. And I think that this particular mosaic is incredibly interesting because the circle is irregular and Venus has a very odd looking figure. This mosaic is one example of regional differences in mosaics across the empire, which could be down to skill, it could be down to resources and wealth for commissioning this type of mosaic, but it could also be partly informed by local tastes, as the shape of Venus might conform to a regional set of assumptions about how bodies should be depicted. And now briefly onto the mosaics found in the eastern provinces. So to a large extent, the mosaics found in the eastern provinces tended to remain Greek in nature, and just like in North Africa too, there was a favour for polychromy and illusionistic figures and mythological figures. Examples of these types of mosaics can be found in Antioch, which has one of the most exceptional sites of Roman mosaics, such as Antioch on the Orontes or the emblema from the House of the Drinking contest. So I hope this has made you more interested in Roman mosaics and to go and research some more on your own. It's just given a kind of brief overview of the development and the different styles that can be found across the Roman Empire. I hope you enjoyed this video, and remember that every day there is a new StudyTube video at 6 PM. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.